Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depends where you are in the world. My name is Meish, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you back to another episode of Containers on the Couch. Today we have a couple of special guests. We have Efe, who was here before about 9 months ago, but he'll explain why he was here 9 months ago and why he's here today. And Sergey, but I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. So please, Sergey, if you can just tell us who you are, what you do in AWS.
Yeah, sure. Very excited to be here for the first time. And my name is Sergey Generalov. I am a senior product manager on Amazon Elastic Container Services. And I am focusing especially on the Copilot, which we're going to talk today about. And Efe, would you please continue from?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Efe. I've been at AWS for almost 7 years now. More specifically, I've been working on Copilot for the past 3 years. So I'm really excited to talk about our latest releases in the past 9 months.
Awesome. And my name is Meish Casing. I'm a developer advocate on the container services team. I work with Efe and with Sergey very, very closely, amongst others. And today we're going to be discussing, as we said, Copilot. So Efe, the last time you were here on the show was about 9 months ago, version 1.13. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Awesome. And Sergey, we're going to be talking about Copilot. So what is Copilot for all of our viewers that don't really know or haven't used it before? If you can explain to us what Copilot does, how it works, or whatever you would like to tell us about.
Yeah, sure. In a simple way, Copilot is a command line interface for developers to run containerized applications on AWS. But to truly understand what Copilot is, let's look at how you would usually deploy your application, let's say a WordPress app or microservices application that has 3 or 4 different microservices or more to AWS. And you would usually provision, or for that matter, to any cloud provider. You would usually provision a VM. You will have to pre-install a programming language on this virtualized server. You will have to prepare this compute environment with all the dependencies. Then you will have to copy application code or its binaries, depending on what the runtime language you use, to that VM. You'll have to configure networking, balancing, load balancing, security, and etc. There's a lot of preparation that goes into preparing the environment before you can actually get the application to be running on that environment in the cloud. So with all that takes, usually days sometimes, and it requires a special, sometimes talent, we used to call it developer operations people, or even before that, there was special IT departments that would do that kind of work. So cloud allowed us to, make it more accessible to all developers and make it more agile. Containers actually made it even possible to take all the application's code, package it, and ship it as single Docker container with all the dependencies, with everything that application needs to be running, and make the code itself a very effective and portable unit of scale. And it became decoupled from the underlying compute environment. If you think about this from that perspective, you understand that containers as a technology kind of enabled to gain even more speed, even more agility on top of what cloud already provides. And it also enabled to shift a lot of the processes and a lot of the decision-making towards the developers. That's what's so-called, sometimes referred to the shift left. You see the developers now that adopted containers, take advantage of all of this benefits and being able to move faster. And there's very interesting data that we have is that many customers who use containers can ship the application and develop faster. And if you think about it, actually 2/3 of containers that run in the cloud are run on AWS. And that's because AWS, compared to other cloud providers, have different offerings. If you want to use open source Kubernetes framework, to run the containers, there's Amazon EKS. If you want to have very deep integrations with AWS, there is Amazon ECS. If you want to just run the containers and don't even worry about servers and managing the compute infrastructure, that is AWS Fargate. And we have customers like Disney, Capital One, Pinterest, Fidelity, Vanguard, among the others. Like there's a lot of customers on AWS who leverage that containers technologies and those services to deploy not only their applications, but to actually innovate faster, as I said. So with Copilot, what we basically want developers, any developer, whether they work in a small company or they work in a large company, whether it's like a single developer or a team of application developers, we want them to take these best practices of how to run containers and how to develop their applications. We want to basically take these practices and leverage the containers in their application development and deployment cycles. So they can move faster, they don't have to spend time configuring all of this. With Copilot, developers can go from 0 to production-ready deployment, within under an hour. And that's because Copilot effectively takes all these best practices, packages it in the CLI experience that you can use to set up production environment, testing environments, set up different different infrastructure components based on whatever your application architecture is. If you need a load-balanced web service, Copilot will help you set up the required infrastructure components and compute and storage and networking. If your application needs to process events that are coming from a queue, Copilot will set up Amazon SNS SQS queues for you and also configure it in a way that it's not only scalable and stable, but most importantly is secure. And we have customers, like we can talk about the use cases and etc. But that's what Copilot is. It makes it very easy for developers to use containers on AWS to develop and run applications.
And when you say it's easy for developers, they don't really have to understand it provisions the infrastructure underneath, if I understand correctly. You don't have to provision VPCs or load balancers or understand how to do all that wiring yourself. All of that is done through Copilot, and then all that, what we call the undifferentiated heavy lifting, is taken care of by the tool itself. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about this, and there's there's a term of managed platform as a service, and which like services like Heroku offer, where you have the developer experience where you can deploy your application, but all the infrastructure that is underlying that is needed to run this application is managed. You as a developer don't have access to it. So this one side of this is one model. But with Copilot, what you can have is that you can leverage AWS, and AWS have thousands of different services and and infrastructure building blocks that you can mix and match to actually solve your problems. Like if your application, as I already said, like depending on what type of architecture application needs, you can find this perfect infrastructure for you, right? So what Copilot allows you to do is effectively to mix and match AWS building blocks together. It also gives you this templates or patterns that you can reuse. And more importantly, you can rely on those templates and patterns that Copilot provides. You can build on top of them. And as you continue to use AWS Copilot, those patterns and templates will continue to be updated and upgraded by the Copilot team. So you effectively always have this almost like outside of like developer operations team working for you to improve your infrastructure without you actually needing to invest into one, right? So that's the really great benefit that we see.
Yeah, and to add to Sergey's point, yes, we will set up infrastructure by default that are following best practices, that's secure. But if you need additional configuration, if you want to leverage the power of AWS, we provide infrastructure as code files that contain additional configurations. So if you happen to be a more advanced user and you have particular use cases in mind, there are knobs that you can tweak using infrastructure as code and deploy those.
And when you say infrastructure as code, we're talking about code that the customer writes, cloud formation. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so I'll demo this part later in the presentation.
Awesome.
But Copilot creates these manifest files. So that's like the infrastructure as code file that you can check out in your Git repository. But they translate directly to CloudFormation templates. So users don't have to figure out how to write the underlying CloudFormation. Instead, they get to work with a higher level manifest file.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think what's great and what's interesting about Copilot is that we started Copilot over a year ago, and we see that customers not only use it, we now have basically more than almost close to 2 years of observing how customers adopt it and the different use cases that they use Copilot for. So we see that not only single developers who want to try to deploy their side project or beginner's project to AWS, and that Copilot is great for this. But also we see customers who have production applications with a complex architecture, with multiple microservices running already in either other cloud providers or on-prem or on EC2, and they basically can take that application and almost lift and shift it to AWS within days without necessarily spending weeks of learning about what's the best way to do this. Because Copilot has this, as Efe said, that Copilot not only allows you to kind of have a very simple getting started experience, but it gives you abstractions that are extendable, and it gives you a way to mix and match infrastructure for your needs, yet without necessarily losing benefits of this continuous upgrade cycle from the Copilot for the basic of the foundation of infrastructure that Copilot will provide.
So I remember you said, we were chatting before, when was the last time you were on the show? Which was version, I think you said 1.13. That
right.
Was 9 months ago?
9 months ago. So it's been 9 releases since then. Now we're on version
Wow.
1.22. Yeah.
And when you say releases, I from what I saw, there's also it's a open source product, correct? Project
Correct.
Which is on GitHub. You can submit pull requests, raise issues.
Yep.
Fully open source, fully community based. That's correct?
Yes, that is correct. In
Awesome.
fact, we had the 2 releases ago, if a customer opened a pull request, added a brand new command into the CLI. We love getting contributions and issues from the community.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Mesh, like you said, 9 months ago, and 9 releases. If you put it in a context, it's a release every month, and it's a release every month that not only brings you innovation, but if I can talk about some of the philosophy and of what goes into the release and how we how we maintain the backward compatibility in this later. But it's very unique product that, as I said, the foundation, you asking customers to build on top your applications on top of that foundation that Copilot provides, and this templates and workflows. You're also releasing every month, right? How do you not break that foundation? So there's a lot of thinking and innovation went into figuring out how to deliver on this without slowing down the innovation, and also not introducing the challenges for the customers who rely on the Copilot infrastructure, not the Copilot infrastructure, but on Copilot
everything else
infrastructure.
Because we release features all the time from all different services, and of course ECS and Copilot is integrated with all those services as well. So Efe, what's new? We released a version, I think, last week. So can you tell us what has changed since the last time you were here?
Sure, yeah. Let me share my screen so that will make it a lot more concrete, I think. And we can take over some demos, get to explore Copilot together. Share screen.
demo time.
All right. Can everyone see my screen? Does it look good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So, all right. So, like we've been saying, it's been nine different releases since the last time we were on the show. And what I'm going to do in this presentation, I'm not going to talk to every feature that was released, but we're going to talk about some of the features in the context of accelerating your DevOps journey, right? And by DevOps, we mean engineering practices as well as cultural practices that help you deliver your applications faster and with higher quality. And more specifically, the engineering practices that Copilot helps you with is infrastructure as code, continuous delivery. So Copilot helps you create a pipeline to deliver your microservices through multiple deployment stages. Security, setting up things with list privilege and with best practices by default, and monitoring and logging. So we'll take a look at some of the features in these contexts. And I thought I could start off with infrastructure as code. That's at this point, I feel like it's table stakes with how we should be developing our applications. So I typed in the terminal Copilot to get the help menu. You can see that we have some commands to help you get started, as well as some of the resources that you can manage with Copilot. In this scenario, I'm mostly interested in creating a microservice with Copilot. And the way that you do that is you type Copilot service in it, and that will help you create a microservice. So what Copilot does is that it's going to ask you some questions. It will have a guided experience. And the end outcome of this prompt is an infrastructure as code file, which we call a manifest file. So if I keep going through this, the end result will be this file that gets created under the Copilot directory. So for this particular example, I have created a microservice that's called frontend. It's an internet-facing service, so that's a load balance web service. So it's a service that's behind a load balancer. Right? Some of the newer features that we added was, for example, alias support. Right? So now I have this domain called coolblackbird.de, and if I enter this value, my domain, into the alias field, then I get an HTTPS endpoint for my service.
And that's automatically tied into Route 53, Amazon
Yep.
Certificate Manager, all the
Exactly.
wiring in the background.
All the wiring is done by Copilot for you. So we provision the certificate, we insert the necessary Route 53 records. Another option is that if you own the domain outside of Route 53, you can always import certificates and manage the records on your own. So which is what I did in this scenario. But if you own the domain itself in Route 53, then Copilot will handle everything for you.
Yeah, and this goes back to this kind of idea of you describe infrastructure of your service, and based on this description, Copilot will provision required. Sorry, you describe architecture of your service, and based on that description, Copilot will provision required infrastructure. And you still have access to it, and you still can customize it into every bit of it, but still see how simple the description is here, and it only kind of focuses on the architecture part.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the other components that's part of this manifest file is you can point to a local Docker file that's in your repository, and Copilot will build the container image from this Docker file. We'll parse the Docker file to realize if there are any exposed ports and fill it automatically for you in the manifest file. So all of these, the image and some of these basic settings already existed before version 1.13. One thing that we've added recently in version 1.15 is the more advanced autoscaling settings. So in this scenario, I'm saying that I want to scale between 1 to 10 Fargate tasks, maintain 70% target CPU. Each Fargate task should handle 10 requests at most. And I can configure, the autoscaling cooldown periods. Right? So if I have larger tasks, this could be particularly helpful. Another feature that we added was support for environment files. So here I have a local .env file in my source repository. So I'm defining this environment variables, the show name, the date, the product, and I can point in my manifest file to this local environment file, and Copilot will take that, package it up, upload it to an S3 bucket, and then inject it into the ECS task definition for me. So all of that work of like figuring out how to upload this into S3 is handled by Copilot. We also made it a bit easier to create, to refer to secrets manager secrets, right? So for example, I can just enter the name of the secret directly into the manifest, and Copilot will be able to inject that as an environment variable for you. So the end outcome of this, so if I switch over to the browser, actually, let me show the code of this container really quick. It's a super basic application. I'm not doing anything fancy. If I receive a request on /, I'm just going to print the environment variables that are injected into the container. So now if I go to the browser and I have, let me zoom in a little bit. So here is my...
zoom in a tiny bit more than that. Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool.
Cool. So yeah, so I have my coolblackbird.de website. You can see all the environment variables that get injected. You can see, for example, the environment file variables that are in here. Copilot creates some environment variables by default for you, like the load balancer DNS name, the application name, and the ones that are injected by the agent. So yeah, so by just specifying an internet-facing service, a load balance web service, and deploying it, I get an HTTPS endpoint for my microservice.
So let me ask you a question about this. You showed before in Copilot that we have kind of a questionnaire which is asked the user on a regular basis. And of course, this is good for manual work. Is there any way to invoke Copilot as part of a pipeline to point it to a file with all the settings pre-populated some way?
Yes, definitely. So actually, let's do it right now. So right now, if I type Copilot service in it, and I say that, hey, I want to create a service that's called front-end again, it's not going to let me because it just quickly errors out saying that, hey, you already have a service manifest file. So if a manifest file is present, those prompts, we skip them over. There is no additional prompts that occur. Now, for the question regarding continuous delivery, so there are two ways of deploying services with Copilot. So if I pull up the menu, you can see that there's a deploy command. So I can type Copilot deploy, and then choose which microservice I would like to deploy. In this situation, I could deploy directly the front-end service. Or another option, which I'll demo soon, is setting up a continuous delivery pipeline for your microservices. So it will take this manifest file and then translate it into CloudFormation stacks and then deploy that, release that automatically. Does that make sense?
Nice. Yes, very much so.
Cool.
There was a question from the chat to ask if Container Insights is automatically enabled for monitoring when you use Copilot.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, while we're talking about infrastructure as code, in version 1.20, we added this manifest file called for environments. So this is like shared infrastructure between all your microservices. And the ECS cluster is one of these resources that are shared across all the services. So if I deploy my front-end service and my API service, they'll both be created under the same ECS cluster. And you can see that in the manifest file for environments, there is an observability field and container insights. So I can toggle this to be true or false, and it will set the container, it will enable container insights on my ECS cluster.
Nice.
Cool. Okay, so I wanted to show some other advanced features that we've been adding. So I'm going to pivot to a different type of microservice. So this one is not internet facing. It's completely private. So that's why we call it a backend service. This backend service is reachable within your private network, within your VPC, but nobody from the internet can reach it directly. Just to illustrate, instead of building from a local Docker file, I'm pointing to an Nginx container image, and I'm saying that it should publish port 80. Now, one of the interesting things that I don't remember which version was this on. I think it was 1.19 that we added was support for the internal load balancers for these backend services. So here, since it's a private service in my VPC, in my network, I can say that Amazon.com should no longer go to the real Amazon.com. Instead, within my VPC, Amazon.com should point to my API service. So any other microservice that's making a request to Amazon.com will get requests forwarded to the API service. If you're familiar already with the load balance web service manifest, maybe you were already using this particular pattern before, you're familiar with the HTTP field, the exact same field, exact same settings are available for the backend service. So we provide consistency across these different architecture types for your microservices. If you have compliance, for compliance reasons, if you want to launch your task in private subnets, you can do that. I think before 1.13, we did have support for SNS topics, so you can do event-driven architectures, right? Like in this example, I'm saying that the backend service called API should have an SNS topic that gets created that's called orders. So Amazon.com will have a topic that you can publish orders events. One thing that's new that we added in version 1.22 in this last release is marking these topics as first in, first out topics. Okay, so to do a demo, so we've been talking so far about infrastructure as code as one of the DevOps practices. I'll do a quick peek into the monitoring and logging pillar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to type Copilot service exec to connect to a container that's running on Fargate, managed by ECS. So I'll say Copilot. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. So Copilot service exec, it's asking me, hey, which container, like which services container do you want to connect to? I want to connect to my front-end service because I want to make a request to my API service. So I choose front-end, and it connects. Yeah, it started the session to that container. And now if I make
now you're directly working in the container, which is running in the service itself.
That's right, exactly. Yep. So this is like running in my VPC. It's a Fargate task. I'm connected to a particular container. And I can type, I can make a request to Amazon.com, and you can see that instead of giving me the real Amazon website, it's making a request to this API service and returning, the Nginx page.
Nice. So, couple of questions I have here to you, Efe, that maybe you can talk a little bit more about. So, what's so unique about exec here from the security perspective? And that because the way you did it, the Copilot makes it almost as simple as Docker execing into the right. But what's the difference with that? And you mentioned that it's running in the VPC. Can you talk about technical parts of that a little bit more?
You have SSH open to the container. How does it work?
No. So there's nothing like that needs to be set up. Under the hood, it uses the SSM agent to connect to the container. And ECS provides a lot of configuration around how to secure these connections with ECS exec. But what Copilot does is that it will automatically set up the necessary. So in this, let me open up the manifest file for the front-end service. I enable exec to be true. And then this translates directly to the necessary IAM permissions, as well as the task definition settings to enable exec on the ECS side. And I don't have to worry about the individual infrastructure pieces. I just have a single field that quickly allows me to connect to my container.
And my understanding is that it's not just enough to have access. You have to be able to use the role. In order to exec, there needs to be certain permissions for a person account to be able to access it. And then that Copilot actually creates that plan, so it's secured, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. So if you go through the ECS exec documentation, you can see the necessary permissions that need to be set up on your behalf, and all of this is handled directly by Copilot. so that you don't have to worry about switching between, okay, I need to go and add an IAM policy and then update my container definition. These two settings are encapsulated directly under a single field, exec true or exec false.
So it's simple from the user perspective, but actually fully secure from like following the least privilege model.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
Efe, we had one more question coming in from Ildefonso. Copilot will do its best to configure your add-on resources defined in the templates. Is the output section where it's picking these values in order to Copilot to configure this resource?
Yes. So what is the question exactly? Is it like, how does it like wire the add-on into the...
Yeah, that's how I understand the question.
I think so as well, yes.
Okay.
Basically, the question is like whether this is done through output section.
Yes, that is correct. So just to give some, just to level the playing field for everybody, add-ons is how you can define additional AWS resources to go along with your services, right? So if you want to add a database, some resource that's not directly supported by Copilot, you can do it through a feature called add-ons. So if I go under developing additional AWS resources, you can see a complete guide. And we make it easy to create these add-on resources for certain type of AWS services. So for example, if I type Copilot storage unit, I'll give a demo soon, but we make it easy for Aura serverless, Amazon S3 buckets, and Amazon DynamoDB tables. Regarding the question, at the end, you could define this resource, but you need to somehow connect this resource, this DynamoDB table, for example, back to the ECS service so that the ECS service can access the database, right? Like otherwise, it won't be able to access it if you don't have the proper IAM permissions. And the way you do that is through outputs. So like Alfonso said, if in my output, here I'm defining the necessary permissions, for example, for DynamoDB to be able to access, right? I'm saying that I should be able to create, delete, update, put item. If I output that manage policy in my add-on template, then it will automatically get wired back to my ECS task. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does, very much so.
Cool. Okay. So the last one that I wanted to showcase that we added in version 1.22 was an update to worker services. So back to the event-driven architecture pattern, right? So I had my API service, publishing events, so order events, and I have my worker service is a queue processing service. So you can listen to events from other microservices and then ingest them. The cool thing is that you don't have to, again, worry about SNS, SQS, IAM concepts. Instead, over here, the way that I'm subscribing to a particular topic, I'm saying that, hey, I want to listen to orders events from the service API. And the wiring in terms of like queue policies, how this SQS queue should subscribe to the SNS topic is handled by Copilot. And in version 1.22, we added support for FIFO queues, FIFO SQS queues. So just to do a demo here, I'm going to switch again over to the terminal, and I'll type another monitoring and logging command. So one thing that I can do is that I can, in my terminal, I can type Copilot service logs, and I can tail logs with the -- follow command. In this situation, I want to tail logs from the worker service. So I go to worker. Now it's going to start printing the logs that are coming into from my worker service. And the way I'm going to test this out is that I will switch over to the AWS Management Console. I'll go to SNS topics. I'll click on the SNS topics that was created for my API service. I will decide to publish a message, right? So I can just write, hello, test, hi, continues from the couch. And if I publish this message, then we should see a log over here come in that's saying that, hey, I received the message and then I deleted it from the S3 queue. So boom, I get that directly. So you can see that Copilot helps you both in terms of like managing the infrastructure with infrastructure as code and then applying them, but also in terms of monitoring and logging, all within a single tool.
Right, and just so, like for users for people who don't have the experience yet with those services, like effectively, like think about the scenario where you need to create like asynchronous event-driven processing for your service. So like worker pattern is making it very simple for you to take advantage and leverage Amazon services, AWS services like Amazon SNS and Amazon SQS, which effectively very highly scalable and effective ways to create this kind of queue processing and create the public pops up mechanism for processing events. That's what we seen just now. If I use like console to create a manual message, but in a real scenario, that would be one service publishing an event that the new order got created, and maybe 3 other microservices will subscribe to that event and do whatever they need to do.
That's exactly right.
So we have a couple of questions flowing in, and a lot of people are very interested, I think. So I'm going to try and get to a couple of them. For example, number one is, can you use Copilot to deploy rootless containers? I would assume the answer for that is yes, depending on which platform you choose.
Right. So if I do want to take it.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that Copilot deploy depending on the pattern that you use. The patterns that Efe presented are going to use AWS Fargate as a compute platform, and on the Fargate, the containers are privileged containers. So you have this security by default where the VM security is handled by AWS Fargate, and all the containers are unprivileged.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have anything else.
And not everything is greenfield. I mean, a lot of our customers have already deployed infrastructure, like they have already existing VPCs or existing services or existing tasks. How does Copilot fit into that? Can we deploy into an existing VPCs, update services, make changes?
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's a great question. So let me just do a demo to showcase that. The way that one of the concepts that I didn't explain is that these microservices have to be deployed somewhere, right? Like typically we deploy to a deployment stage, such as a test environment, and then a production environment. So for that, Copilot has this command called environments, Copilot env, and I can create a new environment with the Copilot env init command. And earlier, we saw like the output of this command, which was the environment manifest file that we recently added. So the one thing that you can do over here is that I can create a new environment. Here, I'm saying that, I've created a test environment before, but I want to create a production environment. I can choose which AWS account and region I want to deploy to using my AWS profile or using temporary credentials. So like in this situation, I'll just use my default profile for just showcasing. And then I can, over here, instead of creating a brand new VPC, like the person asked in chat, is that I can choose to import existing resources. So if I said, no, I would like to import existing configuration, I want to deploy my services in an existing VPC. So here you can see the VPCs that are part of my account in my default region, which is PDX, US West 2. I can import a VPC. I can choose the subnets that are associated with the VPC that I want to deploy to. And yeah, so this allows you to leverage existing infrastructure.
Just to add to that, like you see Efe using the CLI and basically having to answer the questions, which is like gives you guided experience, and you don't have to remember every single detail of how the Copilot manifest is structured, but you also can do everything that is CLI asking you by just writing the manifest or modifying the values of existing manifests. So this YAML file that Efe has it opened on the left side, which is what the infrastructure as code benefits are. You declare it once and then you put it in your code, and as a part of your CI/CD, it creates a very reproducible infrastructure deployments.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so like over here, if I go to the manifest specification for environments, And we have some sample manifests here to help you like quickly set up particular resources that we find like a lot of customers have been asking. So here is a sample manifest for an imported VPC where I can specify my subnets, my VPC ID. And all the settings are available in the documentation. Okay.
So there were a couple more questions. I don't know if we want to go into, you want to go to the demo? A couple of things. Firstly, I think about things which I'm not sure we support today. For example, Elastic Beanstalk, EKS, Proton.
I can answer those
Elastic Bean and Outposts or ECS Anywhere.
Right. I can answer those questions. I think there's a couple of questions. Like first question was about if you're coming from Elastic Beanstalk and you're thinking about where to go next. I think we see customers using Copilot to move applications from different services and sometimes including Elastic Beanstalk to AWS Fargate to Amazon ECS and AWS Fargate combination. And I think Copilot is proving to be a good tool for those customers because as I said, they can get to this continuous deployment CI/CD setup very fast. And if I will show something on that probably, as I understand, later. So yeah, I think that tool can fit use cases, but there's always if you need the help, you can always reach out to AWS experts, and we can provide you more details and feedback. Regarding the other services, like whether Copilot is going to be useful for or not useful for, will you be able to deploy on ECS on premises or into AWS Outpost? Copilot today, the way to think about Copilot is that it provides you packaged, opinionated experience, but it's built on top of CloudFormation. By the end of the day, like the declarative setup and all the CLI answers that you give, that will end up into kind of generated CloudFormation templates that you can tweak. And we see customers who wanted to have a very custom compute setup and underlying platform, and they were able to tweak CloudFormation setup that Copilot provides and deploy and modify this compute platform. So Copilot today does not provide this simple opinionated experience to deploy to those platforms, but it doesn't mean that you cannot use them without you can still leverage. And we're working towards making it more support for other platforms. And there was a question on AWS Proton. I think the way to think about this is that you can use both, and you can use AWS Proton to build the custom templates and leverage this service to gain all the benefits with versioning. And if you have a infrastructure or platform teams that needs to control those templates and distribute them, and the Copilot is about having this opinionated templates that you can get started and move to production very easily. And you will see that AWS Proton has also the similar templates, similar concepts. So we see those tooling as
they complement each other.
Thank you.
Perfect, no problem at all.
Thanks. I hope I answered the questions about those. And I think there was a question Efe, maybe you can talk about this, but can you use Copilot to manage an existing ECS task services?
Okay, so that's a great question. Today, you cannot import an existing service into Copilot. It would be awesome if you can create an issue on GitHub and chime in with your opinions on how you would like that experience to be. But today that is not possible, but we're thinking hard about this.
And do you two sentences, why is it not possible? What's the difference? What are the Copilot adds on top of just services and tasks?
Well, I mean, today's it's not that it's impossible to do. It's mostly about translating existing infrastructure that the client has into a Copilot manifest file. But once it's in a manifest format, I don't know if today, like for example, the ECS service was created through the console, but if you then can import it into Copilot, you would suddenly get the infrastructure as code benefit. You'll be able to use all these logging commands. You could create a continuous delivery pipeline with a single command to deploy that service. It just brings like consistency across your ECS services. So you have one like tool that you need to use to just manage everything.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think also to add, like, there are two paths. Like one is, as if I said, like import existing services in task, and the challenge there is, and challenge is solvable, but like you have to take all the productivity that Copilot brings with those like logs and operational commands, that Copilot is able to make it more efficient because of the way that Copilot's provision infrastructure. That's not a small part of it, and like you need to take a custom infrastructure, and it's a challenge to provide the same efficiency of those commands and make them effective and productive. Like there needs to be certain information that Copilot needs to be able to use, like tags, for example, and etc. Right? So like, and we, as Efe said, like we would love to hear your feedback, like what the specific use cases you have, so we can learn and prioritize that on our roadmap. We also see that customers who take their existing, as I said, existing workloads and they were able to move to Copilot way of provisioning things quite fast. So there is a trade-off, right? Like between like how difficult of this problem it is of moving existing ones to the Copilot is actually. So
yeah. Okay. Cool.
Efe, we only have another 10 minutes, so I know you wanted to demo a lot of other things. I didn't forget to everything, but
yeah, I wanted to, at least like I want to show like pipelines really quick, because I think it's like a really big benefit of Copilot. So Copilot provides, one of these other DevOps practices was continuous delivery, and with pipelines, I can initialize a brand new continuous delivery pipeline by typing Copilot pipeline in it. And then it's going to detect my Git repository. Here is my GitHub URL. It detects the branch that I'm on, and you can enter a name for your pipeline, and the end output will be, again, a manifest file. So infrastructure as code, but to describe the pipeline. So here is a super simple one, just my repository settings, and then it's saying that it's deploying everything to my test environment. So let's take a look at what this pipeline looks like on the AWS console. So if I go to code pipeline, you can see that the pipeline created has a source stage, which pulls from GitHub, my artifacts. It's going to build my container images and then push them to an Amazon Elastic Container Registry repository in the build stage. And then finally, under test, I can deploy, it deploys all my microservices, API, frontend, and worker in parallel, concurrently. One thing that we added that's new in version 1.18, let me pull up the code, is that I can, for example, create ordering between my microservices, right? Like it's possible that I want to deploy my API first so that the new endpoints are available before the front-end service can make a request to it. If they are deployed in parallel, it's possible that there is some downtime. I start receiving 500 errors. I can add a manual approval button to my pipeline. So now that I made this manifest update, for example, if I type Copilot pipeline deploy, it's going to take this manifest specification. It's going to ask me if I'm sure that I want to update an existing pipeline. And once I say yes, it's going to make this, it's going to translate this manifest file into a CloudFormation template for the code pipeline. And if I go over here and refresh it, I should see that, well, soon, after it's done proposing the changes to CloudFormation, that the pipeline should get updated. Okay, so it says success over here. And yeah, so you can see that a manual approval button was added. You can see that my API service gets deployed before my front end and worker service. And that's because that's how I describe my pipeline to look like. if I wanted to add, new deployment environments such that they go to production after the test environment passes, then I can just add a new stage over here, and that's it. Okay, so that was for continuous delivery. Yeah.
Just to add also, remember that environment concept that we described through the conversation. I think like you effectively can have this abstraction of like a manifest of your architecture deployed across the environment and have a pipeline of the continuous delivery for each environment separately. And that's like allows you to create quite complex CI/CD setups within just a couple of CLI commands, which is pretty awesome in my book.
Okay.
So bouncing off that question, of course, there was one of the questions that Mark Cloud Arc had on the chat was, can you enable ECR enhanced scanning and lifecycle policies to Copilot CLI? Essentially, I would assume yes, because you can add any kind of step to do anything as long as you can call it through the pipeline. So I would assume the answer would be yes.
Actually, not yet. So
not yet. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's a great feature request. It's on our roadmap. There is an existing GitHub issue on this. So the ECR repositories are not today, like that particular field, we're not exposing it for scanning the repos and setting lifecycle repository. Yeah.
I jumped the gun. I'm sorry.
Just to be clear, there's two user experiences of like what we can mean by enabling. Like as I said, like enable through like manifest is one, and the second one is like I can customize the resources and the cloud formations like templates by getting my hands dirty. Like the second one is always there, like and that's what Misha will talk about. Like that second option of getting the hands dirty. And is always there. It's always persistent, and you have ability to do what almost everything that the AWS provides. But like without getting hands dirty, like through Copilot like experience is not fully there yet for that.
Yeah, for ECR repositories is one of the resources that we don't yet expose through the manifest file, but for everything else, in the environment manifest and the service manifest, you should find ample settings available.
And maybe like a quick gateway to a different topic is like, it's an open source project. Right?
Exactly. So in other words, what can I really, with my wildest dreams, do with this? I mean, it should be, if it's open source, it's extensible. What can customers do with this in order to expand or enhance this in some kind of way?
Yeah. So I can quickly start, and then maybe before this, there's like one more question from Mark. Do you want to answer that now or later?
I think let's get into the extensible part first, and if we have time, we'll get to that question. If not,
so let's first start
next time
on the open source. Like, first of all, it's an open source project, right? Like, you can file an issue. There is a chat on a GitHub where more than 300 of like users chat and ask questions and help each other. And there's always a Copilot Copilot maintainers that are present there and like can help you with navigating Copilot and also take your feedback. And that's like very great way to actually not only get in touch and learn about Copilot, but actually move agile and solve your, work with the open source community to solve your issues. You can open issue, and like we are super active on the GitHub and collaborate with the community. That's just from an open source perspective. Efe can talk about extensibility from the perspective of like platform formation and CDK more.
Yeah, so nothing today, as we discussed earlier, there's absolutely nothing that's blocking you to use Copilot alongside with the CDK or alongside with any other tooling. So we see a lot of customers, for example, use AWS SAM to deploy Lambda functions, and then use Copilot to handle the container side of things with Amazon ECS and AWS Fargate. But more specifically, if you want everything, like the infrastructure as code, to still be managed through Copilot, it's with the add-ons functionality that we were discussing earlier. So if you go under developing and then additional AWS resources, you can take a look at the modeling with AWS CloudFormation section. And if you have any questions about how do I write specific things or how to do some integrations, feel free to create an issue or reach us on Gitter.
And that Gitter is here. I'm going to put that in the chat so everybody can see where that is for sure.
Yeah, you can find all the links from the GitHub page of the Copilot or from the Copilot website. But yeah, the Gitter is on the chat in the comments.
It's all in the README at the very top, the
Awesome.
chat and the documentation.
We're coming to the top of the hour, and I don't want to run over into the show, which is coming on afterwards because we have one very specific slot. Closing up, I want to point everybody to the latest show, the release notes for release version 122, where you can see everything which is added. And of course, if you want to as well, look from all the previous release notes, which was at least 9 since the last time you were last year on the show. Our Twitter handles are here in the chat or on our names over here. And if not, they'll be also posted on the Containers on the Couch YouTube channel on this episode, which was recorded. Any last closing comments before we close out today?
No, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Please let us know if you have any feedback about Copilot. We'd love people contributing. So just drop us an issue, ask us if you can pick up a particular task, and we'd love to guide you through the code base if needed.
Well, sorry, that was the wrong one. I apologize. It was a collaborative project, and I missed the button. Collaborative project, and we really would enjoy and appreciate if you would like to get involved as well. So, sorry, Sergey, you were going to say.
I was just going to say +1 to both Mesh and Efe, and there's more cool things coming on Copilot. There is as I said, GitHub page, issues, open issue. If you want to talk about Copilot and learn more, we're always happy to discuss it online or set up a conversation. And as I said, you probably saw how hard is it to pack everything that Copilot did over the 9 months within an hour.
You get to half of it, anything.
We have like maybe
I
less
didn't go through
10%.
half of the things.
So if you want to have more of Copilot on the Containers from the Couch, let us know. Just basically send the Mesh a DM message on Twitter and send
me a message on Twitter, reach out, or my username at amazon.com, find there as well. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. It was an awesome episode. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.